hire more underrepresented faculty so they are no longer underrepresented.
Boom. Done.
But we solved all the problems.
No. I'm Adri Cortee and welcome back to my YouTube channel. First things first, make sure to subscribe and hit that red bell so you always get notifications every time that I post. So today I'm super excited to be interviewing 3 members of the Inclusivity and Biosciences Association, also known as IBA, and the Department of Biological Sciences at Vanderbilt University. So this is Katrina Ngo. She is a rising 5th year Vietnamese American PhD student in the Biological Sciences Department in the lab of Kathy Friedman, and she's the current president of IBA. This is Remi Hoerr. She is a rising 3rd year PhD student, also in the Biological Sciences Department and also in Kathy Friedman's lab, and she is the current vice president of IBA. This is Mariana Jimenez. She's also a rising 3rd year PhD student in the neuroscience graduate program. And she is currently working in Todd Graham's lab, and she is a current member of IBA. IBA is an organization at Vanderbilt which advocates for diversity and inclusion in the biological sciences. They meet regularly to talk about disparities in research. They also participate in outreach events in the community to provide the opportunity for young people to learn about STEM fields. And IBA is available to any bioscientist at any stage in their career. So today they're going to tell us all about IBA. So welcome and thank you for being here. Do you guys want to say anything before we jump into the interview?
Do you want to tell people to like and
Hi, Bessie. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
She's been practicing for weeks, so we really needed to get that in. Okay, so we'll just jump into the interview then. So first question, when was IBA founded?
Okay, so IBA was founded in 2016, so we're still kind of a relatively newish club.
So who founded IBA, the students or the faculty?
So it was the idea of 2 students, Kate Snyder and Jessica Abner.
So how often does IBA meet?
We meet every other week, unless there's like a holiday or if people want to take a break. And sometimes they're informal meetings, like a lunch, just get together, and sometimes they're more structured, like a book club.
Gotcha. So how many current members of IBA are there?
So people who come to meetings, well, it's hard because you have members who regularly come to meetings in which there's probably like 6 or 7-ish. And then people who are just on the email list, because we do a lot of outreach, so sometimes people will be on the email list and just respond for like the outreach stuff and not go to regular meetings. And then there's probably like maybe 20 or 30 people who will like respond to outreach stuff.
So can you walk us through the itinerary of like a normal IBA meeting?
A fun one or a structured one?
Give us both.
Okay. So during the meetings, we essentially kind of get together and get to know a little bit of chatting at the beginning. But then like Katrina, usually, who is our president, starts off our meeting with like whatever agenda we had for that week. And then perhaps like we're discussing a paper or podcast or something. And so then we'll go through the podcasts. And usually we don't like go through like every single detail of the paper or the podcast, but it's like there's an idea that struck someone. And then we kind of go into conversation and a kind of tangent. And then one thing that I kind of really like is that usually some of the things that we were discussing actually happen here at Vanderbilt too. And so we try to come up with like, what could we do to make that better? Because when I definitely know I felt this way during like a seminar or blah, blah, whatever, and then like we kind of talk about how to like make solutions like that.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's like the structured one.
Yes.
What's a fun one?
We just sit there and talk.
Yeah, we just gossip.
Okay, just gossip.
It's a bit related.
Yeah.
It's definitely more of like a safe space for people to talk about like any like grievances they've had in the department or like wish like grad students knew going into like picking a lab or something. So it's not necessarily we're talking about an article or a podcast. We're more just like discussing our thoughts and feelings.
It's worth noting that IBA was founded because there was this frustration that students were having, mostly women students or female students, were frustrated that they felt like they couldn't talk about some of the things that were bothering them, both just politically in the world, but also just like being a woman in science. Sometimes there are certain frustrations and they didn't feel like they had a safe space to like talk about them. Because in lab, you have to be professional all the time. Well, not in every lab, but
some labs.
But in a clubs, you have to be professional, you have to watch what you say, because you don't want to burn any bridges or anything. And so the students who founded the club were just really wanting there to be a space where they could just talk about the things that were frustrating them and not have to worry about like looking unprofessional. And then it turned into, okay, well, how can we like solve some of the things we're frustrated about? That's like really true to the heart of the club, is just having a space for us to talk about the things that are frustrating us. And so that is what we do sometimes.
Gotcha. Seems like an important thing to have.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
definitely.
really nice.
Yeah. How do you decide what to discuss during each meeting?
So sometimes we'll just have people find like a podcast episode or something that they read that really interested them.
Katrina and I are in the same lab, and so we definitely discuss ideas sometimes. We listen to some of the same podcasts, so we're like, oh, we should totally talk about this podcast idea. I actually found something for us to talk about from TikTok one time.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So it totally varies. It's just like
Yeah.
whenever you see something, we like share it in the Slack of like, oh, I want to talk about this idea.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then sometimes it's like big things happening in the news. So like we talked about COVID a lot last summer and how it was affecting academia, and then also talking about like Asian Americans and how they're treated, and then like Black Lives Matters and how Black people are treated in science we've discussed. So it really just, whatever we feel like we want to talk about, we make space for it.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so I didn't ask the question about like, you know, what podcasts you guys listen to or anything, but you can tell me afterward, and I then can link it down below and you guys can go check it out.
Rob has a podcast for Big Brother.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with
Big Brother listen to weekly.
Not that.
I listen to a lot of like NPR Code Switch.
Yeah, like.
I'll say maintenance phase.
Yeah.
Oh, I love maintenance phase.
You want to come to IBA? We're talking about
Do you
that.
guys talk about maintenance phase in IBA?
We're
sometimes?
going to.
We're going to talk about it.
I love that. Okay. Maybe I'll. I've just been invited to an IBA meeting. Does IBA invite outside speakers to come to talk to the group? And if so, how do you guys decide what speakers to invite?
Yeah, so one of the things that from the beginning IBA wanted to do was invite speakers to the Biosciences seminars, because professors go to those regularly, and then we wanted to like trap them in a room and force them
They had to be
to
there.
learn about like DEI issues and stuff. And so we've had like a lot of different speakers come. Sometimes we'll decide just based on like we'll pick a paper to read for a meeting and really want to like know more about it. So then we'll invite someone to speak. For example, one of the speakers we had last year was Maricela Martinez-Cola, who wrote a paper about like white mentors in the academy. She's a sociologist, and so we had her come and talk about that. I should have said Dr. Maricela Martinez-Cola, my bad. She was super nice and had a lot of insight because she had talked to a lot of people who are underrepresented who like have white mentors.
Yeah.
Sometimes someone will just suggest a speaker. Like there's a lot of different ways, but usually it's like someone identifies someone that they think would be really cool and could talk about. Usually it's like mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Dr. Levante Esters actually spoke for the Vanderbilt Bridge program.
So is the department usually pretty open to you guys being like, we want to have this speaker during like the department seminar?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they've been pretty good about letting us have a speaker. I think they like that we pay for the speaker.
Yeah.
So as long as we're paying for the speaker and there are open spots for the seminar series, we're able to like invite people.
Okay, so the next question was just asking you about the speakers that have come and what kind of things they talk about and who the audience was. So you answered some of that, but did you want to mention any more speakers?
So we've had a lot of really good speakers, so I just want to shout out a couple of them, I guess. So Dr. Nicole Joseph, who is at Vanderbilt, she was our very first IBA speaker, and she organizes the March for Black Women in Science that happens every year. Also had Dr. Isaac Sabat come in, but he runs the Pride Lab, and so he talked a lot about like LGBTQ issues in science. Yeah, we've had a lot of speakers come and talk about different things.
Nice. So why is there a need for DEI efforts in academia? It's a pretty loaded question.
That's a lot. So I think the main reason why it's good to have DEI efforts is so that more people can be represented in science. Because if you think about science, a lot of people think that it's like really objective and we don't have any biases, and that's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have just one type of person working on science, you're going to miss things,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not going to have everyone be represented. And so having DEI efforts helps ensure that we actually have like a full range of like knowledge and that people can be represented. And you see like this disparity when you start looking into like medical research and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really important to have like a great diversity of minds like thinking about things, because if you don't want to like miss stuff.
And it's unfortunate that like a majority of the researchers that are performing these like clinical data studies are doctors, and all the doctors for some reason seem to be white and male. And so you end up having a huge standard of people that are being diagnosed based on criteria from a population that is mainly white male, and then that does not apply to people of color, people of different genders, people living in different socioeconomic backgrounds, because that's never ever taken into account. And so it's like a huge thing for the research that we're publishing, but also within our whole program is being able to think more kind of wide-minded in terms of what we should be considering. Another reason you would have to have DEI support within like a department or within academia is that a lot of the times students of minority backgrounds or lower socioeconomic status or any of the disparities that are like considered often don't feel the support that they would have like by your parents, and you maybe don't even have the support from like family, so you have to get it through like internal pathways, and those pathways don't exist in a lot of places. And so it's really important for DI to be able to first establish these types of support systems, but actually not just be verbal about them, but actually show that they're actually doing something, giving like perhaps more funding, giving like weekly seminars specifically for XYZ topic that would actually help the students be able to realize that this, maybe like I'm experiencing imposter syndrome and I had no idea what this was, so how can I deal with this? How can I succeed? Or maybe if it's, especially in research, resilience is a huge thing that people talk about, and like, you should be resilient, but it's very difficult for many people. And depending on your background factors, that could be worse or better.
Sometimes I think resilience is almost like a weapon against people who are being like discriminated against or have extra obstacles, because then you can just blame that person for not being resilient enough instead of blaming the systems that are working against them. And I think to a level you do have to be like resilient in the sense that sometimes experiments won't work and you have to try again. But you shouldn't have to be resilient in like the system is actively against me and I have to fight against it. That's not a fair thing to tell someone.
Like for example, like here, I think one of the biggest things that I've seen where someone has to be resilient or feels that they should be resilient because they're like, I want to be equal to like everyone else, is if they have a mentor that is not good and they're like constantly like berating them for like XYZ purposes that is literally unnecessary. And so the student is just there like feeling this every day until like the point where they were like, okay, and we're done. I'm leaving science forever because it's always like this. Or they're like, I need to leave lab, or I just have to not be here at all. And because there's just not enough support. And even if you do report some of these things, there are internal channels to report them, but at some point some administrator way up high has to make a decision. And a lot of the times if the faculty that's like seen as a bad mentor has enough funding that they're bringing into the university's like, okay, that's okay, we'll just pat them on the head, be like, you shouldn't do this anymore, and then you'll still see the pattern for many, many years just because they're able to bring in like millions of dollars to the university.
Yeah.
Well, and also being able to bring in money is a sign to the university that like they're still good at their job. And so, and if they still have students publishing, the university just sees the publications.
Yeah, I think the measure of success a lot for PIs is like you said, publishing and bringing in money, but I'm not sure if they're checking for like supporting students, mentoring and things like that. Like there's not like a way to see that.
I don't feel like we ever get asked like how we actually feel about our mentors, like how much support we're given, like how much support in the sense of our like science itself, our training, our emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And so there's not a really good system in place for like checking on that and seeing that, which is very unfortunate for students.
And in some cases, it would be hard to implement that system because not every PI would want that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To be because it'd be really easy to just be like, I made this Google form, please fill it out so people know. But then some PIs would be like, well, that's not fair assessment.
Yeah.
So.
But I think it's the same with like after, you know, students take a class. You get like a bunch of people, and if like most of the people are like, this was amazing, then you have one that was like, this was awful, you usually like take the opinion of the majority. So they could do the same thing for PIs, but if like most of us are saying the PI is awful, it's like, shouldn't we?
Graduate school is such a smaller sample size in that like if you only have like two students rotate and then like they both rate you poorly, you know who those two students are, and students are less likely to speak up. IGP, they do have a system where you do rate your rotations, but they do have like a second like part that is secret where you can like put comments that the mentor will not see and only administrative people will see, and so then they can use that for future students who are coming like considering rotations. Oh, I'm in between this lab and this lab. Oh, well, some of the secret comments in the past have been less than pleasant about this person.
It's not just being negative that's useful either. Like, it would also be useful because sometimes you have students like, I have no wet lab experience, and I would like a lab that could be really supportive in me getting some wet lab experience. And if there were good comments, they'd say, oh, this mentor has actually been really good at taking students who have no wet lab experience. And like helping them, and they're like, not too demanding for your rotation and stuff like that. So it goes both ways. Like, it would be great to have comments both negative and positive because sometimes you do need like a little extra support, and so to know like what lab would be good for that would also be really useful.
So why do you think certain identities such as African Americans and Native Americans are so underrepresented in academia?
Getting your education, that is a shit ton of money.
And once you get to college, in order to get into grad school, you have to have lab experience. And getting lab experience means you have to have extra time, so you can't be working a lot. You can't have a second job, and if you do, you're gonna like way burn yourself out. And then not all labs will pay you, so then you have to be able to like be unpaid and also not be able to get a second job. Anyone who's a low socioeconomic status is gonna have that barrier, and so I think you're absolutely right that like access is a big thing. And then once you get there, there's also an issue of support. And so a lot of people won't have the support they need once they finally get to grad school to overcome some of like the extra obstacles. And I think you alluded to it earlier as well, where like you just won't have a mentor that is supportive and helps you like get through grad school, which is really hard. Like, grad school is hard.
There's like a lot of talk about, I don't know if it's like the leaky pipeline, is that what it's referred to? Where basically, even if you have representation at like an undergraduate level in STEM, getting to a graduate level, there's drop off, and then staying in academia is a drop off. And part of that is because like, why would you want to stay in academia if it's not going to pay you well? And it's not like your colleagues are going to support you at the same level as your other white colleagues, because there's so much more added pressure being the only person representing your community if you are like the single faculty of color at an institution.
And getting like, even once you get a job that doesn't pay that well, even getting that job is like really hard.
There is not good job stability in academia. So it's not like, oh, I get my PhD and it's fine, I'm guaranteed a job.
Not to scare people off of getting a PhD though, because like you can, like, getting into academia is hard, but you can get jobs in industry, you can get government jobs, like there are other jobs. One of my best friends is like super into the USDA.
Alright.
Valid? Academia is not the only way.
So I just wanted to like point that out real quick before people watch this and they're like, well, I'm never getting a PhD.
No, there's so much.
Because it's also very, very fulfilling. I don't know about you, but I think it's very fulfilling for me. And research isn't the only thing that we are learning as graduate students. We learn a lot about communication. We learn a lot about mentoring.
I think it's also worth noting that like a person can be diverse in many different ways,
Oh,
not
yeah.
all of which are visible.
Yep.
And so, like, for example, I'm very obviously Asian.
What?
I know, it's wild. But I'm also, like, bisexual, which is not as obvious, but is also another layer of, like, diverse. Now, I'm annoying, so I'll tell everybody. So then they'll know.
She will wear her bi mask.
I do have a bi flag mask. I also have a shirt that says Best Buy on it. But, like, usually, like, stuff like that. You also have, like, disabilities that are always very obvious. Need to have support for every aspect.
Some mentors do not know how to get support for their students. And there is a lot of support for minority students from both like the NIH, from NSF, from the university themselves. And I've had multiple occasions where like I've had to like bring opportunities to my PI and be like, hey, can I do this? And she's like, oh, I forgot you're able to like fit into this category. And I'm like, okay, I'm the only person of color in your lab. Yeah. She like felt really, really bad afterward, and she's like, no, definitely, you should definitely do this, and I'll definitely support you in all of this. But it was like some things, it's not something that maybe if it's not their identity, they're not going to think about all the time.
Yeah.
Which is something that is harmful to other people, especially if you're not thinking about that.
Exactly.
A sponsor
Sponsor.
versus a
Mentor.
mentor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so luckily I've had multiple sponsors in my time in like research, and so they've told me like, hey, you should do this, and you should do this, and this exists, and this exists. And so they're like, I have someone to like tell me this is what we need to do. But if I didn't have those sponsors, I would be missing out on like a ton of opportunities that could have like easily made a difference in whether or not I was going to stay in academia or not.
Can you like explicitly just define a sponsor really quick?
Yeah. 2 terms I threw out there was like mentor, which is someone who's kind of above you and they're teaching you all of these skills, not just like in lab, but as like communication, talking with other scientists, and they're helping you and supporting you in your role. And then a sponsor, that specifically is advocating for you. So they're going out there and being like, hey, to this administrator, hey, this person is really great. I really think they should be qualified for this. Or they'll go out and apply for stuff just for you. So they're actually going out there and getting you these opportunities versus telling you, being like, hey, I think this might work for you. You should try looking into this. And so those are very different things.
They should be dropping your name all the time.
I actually see that very often in mentors during seminars. The ones that'll be like, hey, this postdoc is amazing. You really, really want them. Highly advocating for them. Versus other ones will be like, and this is my lab who also helped with the work. It's also, this is why you have to have multiple people in your lives advising you.
Yeah. What kind of DEI resources does Vanderbilt offer?
There's like a DEI office that has a lot of the resources listed. But most of the resources are less tangible because they're like different offices that have different meetings to discuss specific issues as they pop up. But there are different clubs and like IBA, but there's also clubs that are more specific. So like off the top of my head, there's like SACNIS, and then also
OB gaps.
there's like VUIs, which is for women. There's also like an LGBTQI office. There are things that exist, but you do have to seek them out. They're not as obvious. Like we don't get a list of like DEI resources you get here.
No.
So you have to really like look for them. I think at some point IBA wants to update our website so it has a bunch of different resources. But Vanderbilt does have a lot. You just have to look for them.
Yeah,
and
and
find
that's a huge problem here. Is
Yeah.
that you have to go and find them, and they're in different places, and a lot of the times they don't communicate with each other. And like one of the resources that we have here is like the Initiative for Maximizing Student Diversity, which is IMSD, which is like an NIH funded program. And for a long time it was very exclusive. And so it wasn't until like maybe 3 or 4 years ago that they started like actually reaching out to other students. It's because like originally it was based on funding, and so it could only give funding to like 20 students at a time. But there are many other people who could benefit from like the conversational spaces, could use some of the resources. And so it wasn't until recently that we actually started to open up to other people like that aren't getting, let's say, the NIH funding, but we still would like you to participate in these things and have the resources.
But I will say to give Vanderbilt a little bit of credit, at least these things exist.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of schools where like these things don't even exist. But Vanderbilt could do a much better job about letting people know they exist so that people can really utilize the resources.
So what kind of DEI resources does the Biological Sciences Department offer?
IBA.
IBA? Here they are!
Hi guys.
This is it!
Yeah, I think the department's a lot smaller, obviously, than the full university. The fact that they allow us to bring in a speaker is really nice. But for the department, it's like our club and then specific professors who like can be trusted will sometimes like talk to students, but there is not like an official like thing to my knowledge.
Like most departments are kind of like that.
Yeah, most departments, because they rely on the bigger universities.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the university has so many resources that I think the departments are like, well, we don't need to like have
another one.
double resources,
Exactly.
just go to university, which would be fine if they were like, students, here are the resources.
Yeah, if they weren't kept secret. So from the resources we just talked about, do you think they are adequate? And if not, what are some ways they could become more adequate? So you talked about visibility, not being exclusive. Did you want to add anything?
If there was like one faculty that you could talk to in every department.
So there is like a list of faculty.
Really?
So
That's not good.
a while
She didn't know about it.
I didn't know that.
So a while ago, there was a lot of talk about like sexual harassment in STEM, and so they did a lot of like focus groups, I guess, for each department. And one thing students were saying, and this wasn't just about sexual harassment, it was just like about not feeling supported or feeling like microaggressed for whatever reason or whatever, is that it would be nice to have professors they could talk to like outside of their department, or like who they knew weren't like BFFs with whatever PI they were having issues with, because that's another thing. It's like you can go to your DGS, but what if DGS is the Director of Graduate Studies, but what if the DGS is like best friends with the PI you're having a problem with? And so at some point, they basically asked professors if they would be comfortable with having students come to them if they had these different issues, and they made this list of professors that were like, yeah, you can come talk to me. But I think they only sent it out like once.
So I guess it comes back to visibility.
Yeah, but it comes back to visibility.
Because we should be able to find that
we're very
easily.
lost.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the university's resources and our department's resources. What kind of DEI resources should the PI offer to their students? So we talked about being a sponsor. Did you want to mention anything else?
I think sponsor, and then also just being willing to like speak up for your student. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, things that happen aren't as obviously terrible as they used to be, but sometimes it's as simple enough as like being in a lab meeting and saying something and then having someone else say the same exact thing you said and then getting credit for it. So PI could support their students by being pretty vigilant about that and being like, oh, like I think Remi just said that or something like that, and just acknowledging people's individual ideas and making sure people aren't able to speak over other people and stuff. Just like simple things like that. And just being really cognizant of their students and how they're doing.
Also, not even in like a lab meeting setting. That's happened to me in seminars.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I just said that.
Yeah.
It's the same
Do
question
you
I just
say
asked.
I just said that, or do you?
No,
or
I
you
don't
just
know.
Yeah,
I'm not brave enough to say
Well, it's hard
that.
in seminar too because it's like
hard
all
to ask
the
the
professors
question.
are
Yeah.
there.
You had to already
And it's-
get it going.
Yeah. And so, but if you had a PI who like could recognize that that's happening, and even maybe not in front of everybody if that would embarrass you, but then afterwards be like, hey, you had a really good question, and like I know if someone else said that after you, but like I want you to know that like I saw that you like had that really good question.
Exactly.
Just like acknowledging what happened and then advocating for you.
So if someone feels like their PI is not supporting a part of their identity, what do you think they should do?
I think it really depends on the person and like what they're comfortable with. You do always, in most schools, have the option to switch labs, find a different mentor by like talking to other students of who would be a good mentor, and hopefully your department is supportive of that. And like a lot of schools, I do remember during my application phase of a lot of schools emphasize like we are supportive of students if they end up having to switch a lab due to mentorship disagreements or just for any reason. So that is always an option. But some people maybe aren't comfortable with that if they're so far along in their career that they don't want to increase their timeline to graduation. And so it's a completely valid personal choice for what you want to do. Definitely talking to a resource on campus of maybe someone who could help advocate or mediate a meeting with your PI about like what you are feeling and what you are experiencing is also an option.
And some schools like Vanderbilt have a person who is like specifically designated for some sort of like mediation role. Like we have the graduate student life coach who I know has like mediated between students and their mentors before. But also if the mentor has to be like open to mediation as well.
Yeah.
So there are some mentors who do genuinely mean well, and they're like not trying to be an asshole, they're not trying to be terrible, they just like have never mentored a student that needs extra stuff before and they don't know what to do. So if you like approach them and you're like, hey, I'm not getting the support I need, they'll be like horrified. They'll be like, oh my god, I've been being an asshole, I'm gonna fix it. And then you have some mentors who are just like, be more resilient.
Yeah. It's a you problem.
It's a
Like,
you
that's
problem.
how it goes.
Yeah.
It's just like graduate school is hard, be better. So like if you have the first type of mentor, then like they'd be open to mediation and learning how they can be better. But you have the second type of mentor, you might just want to leave because you're not going to get anywhere.
So the minority tax is the burden of extra responsibilities placed on underrepresented faculty in the name of diversity. How do you think the minority tax could be decreased for underrepresented faculty?
Hire more underrepresented faculty so they are no longer underrepresented.
Boom.
Done.
Remi
Solved all the problems.
No, that is good.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, oh wait, that's the first step.
That's
That's the first step.
yeah.
If you're going to force faculty to also be a part of like a diversity committee, like why not just hire somebody else if that is their job instead of placing that burden on faculty who have a different job to do as well, or incentivize them, pay them more for doing that extra job. So there's always those options. Like obviously I'm not an underrepresented minority, so volunteering to take some of that position of, oh, if you want me to take that on, I don't want to take an opportunity away, but I would be willing to help. So you can come at it from two different angles.
A lot of the like papers we've been reading, they like try to have solutions at the end, and one of the main solutions that comes up over and over again is cluster hiring. And that is like hiring a lot of people who are underrepresented at one time instead of just one, so no one ever has to be the only one.
Yeah.
And that's also helpful because when you have like panels and things like that, then the same underrepresented person isn't always asked to be on the panel. It's like, it looks really bad if a panel just has like all white men. But then if you only have one woman in the department, or you only have like one person of color in the department, then they're always asked to be on everything. And sometimes they feel like they can't say no because they're like, well, I don't want the panel to be all
exactly.
And
all
so,
white men.
All white men. So they just like have this like burden that's not really fair on their shoulders. So like everything Remi said, but also cluster hiring.
Can you give us a few examples of inequitable practices in academia?
I think a lot of it is hard to say like, oh, specifically people like don't get paid enough or whatever, because like we don't know what people are being paid and if it's unequal. I think a lot of it is kind of stuff like being talked over all the time, which gets very grating, or always asking to be the only one on the panel so you don't have time to do other work. Because it's like, if you're the only woman, for example, and you're always asked to be on a panel, when do you get to write grants? When do you get to do your research? Whereas the like 50 men in your department, they don't have to be on as many panels. They just get to focus on their grant writing. And if you get to focus on your grant writing, you get more funding. If you get more funding, you're more likely to be promoted. And so it's just like a lot of little barriers and extra things that make it harder to do really well and to get promotions and stuff. but there's not like a specific practice. It's a lot more subtle.
Yeah.
Micro.
Also, looking not just at faculty, but looking even at getting into graduate school, there's a lot of like hidden things that a lot of students don't know about for getting into graduate school. And so either they won't apply because one, applications cost money.
Each
and
one.
Yes, each one. But if you don't know somebody in academia or you don't have like the resources to tell you that a lot of schools offer fee waivers.
Yeah.
And you can also just ask a university for a fee waiver or just say, hey, I can't afford the application, but I really want to apply. And it won't affect your application negatively. But if you don't have somebody who's advocating and helping you through that process, then that is a level of inequity, as well as finding research experiences. If you don't have the ability to know, like some research experiences can be paid and there's like these national ones that you can apply for, that if you don't know because nobody in your like community bubble has gone to graduate school, how would you know without trying to scour all of the internet, which there's so many different conflicting things. And so I think that's like another measure of inequity of just like, how do you even get to this point?
Yeah.
Especially if you're a person that you haven't had that support in your life, and you're like the first to go to undergrad, first to go to grad school. You're like, who the crap am I gonna ask?
Yeah, and it's also hard for like first gen people. So like, I'm a first generation, and so there are just some, like my dad went to college here, but there's still a lot of things that he didn't know, or my parents didn't know about, like navigating the system, just because like they were in Vietnam. That's a very fair reason to not know. I had to do a lot of the Googling and then panicking because not everything is the same, and then like reaching out to people and just being like, how do I do this?
Exactly.
This seems very overwhelming.
And then who do you trust?
Yes, and that's
Who are you gonna trust?
I don't trust anybody.
Okay, so what are some ways that IBA creates awareness about inequities in the biological sciences department and in Vanderbilt as a whole?
We talked about earlier about how IBA does invite speakers, so this definitely promotes awareness at the department level. Additionally, like we have a Twitter that one of our members, Lindsay, runs, and she frequently tweets out articles, things that we're discussing, or just articles that she's read and is interested in.
So what kind of science outreach efforts has IBA been a part of?
Okay, so there have been a lot of them. Ones we've kind of already talked about is we run a workshop series to help people apply to graduate school, and they're all over Zoom, so anyone everywhere come. We've had international students come to these, even though for their time it's like 4 a.m, but they're like really dedicated.
Nice.
But there's like 4 in the series. The first is usually in the spring semester, and it's just a what is graduate school like panel, so people can ask questions to grad students about what grad school is like. And then there's Applying 101, where we just kind of go through the checklist of things you have to think about when you apply. And then we do a personal statement writing workshop and an interview workshop where people can get feedback on their personal statements and then get a practice interview with the grad student. And then other things we've done, back when a few years ago we made some kits to teach evolution to like rural schools in Tennessee, and we made like these games and packets, and we mailed them off. And then within that we also sent a flash drive with videos that had interviews with different scientists and stuff, so people can kind of see like what scientists are actually like. One year we ran a symposium for women in science, specifically about the drop-off Remi was talking about earlier, because there are now a lot of women in undergrad, but then there's a drop-off like to grad school, and then there's a drop-off after grad school, and so it was focused on the after grad school drop-off. Now we're working with, I think it's the Diversity in Science lecture series, which started at UCSF, I believe. We've been working with them to get speakers for a Vanderbilt version of the series, and basically what it is, they invite speakers who are usually from underrepresented minorities to talk specifically about their science, because a lot of times people from underrepresented minorities get invited to speak, but it's not about their science, it's about the fact they're underrepresented. And so they're invited to speak about their science, and if they want to talk about their like diversity journey, they totally can or are able to do so. But also they have the space to talk about the science they do. And that is also over Zoom, so people can come.
So why is science outreach an important part of increasing inclusivity in science?
The one that's easiest to talk about is those graduate school workshops that we host. So a lot of students who don't have those resources to talk to people about like, what do I need for graduate school? People like are still in undergrad who are applying, they can go to their advisor, but a lot of people also take time off in between undergrad and applying to graduate school, and maybe they didn't know they wanted to go to graduate school until later, and so you may not have a direct resource where you can ask questions or get feedback about your personal statement. And so it's a good resource to promote that for people who maybe wouldn't have that. Or maybe they don't want to talk first to a faculty member, because there's this idea with like imposter syndrome of holding yourself as an underrepresented minority to a higher standard of, because you're the one person who's representing a community, I have to excel above everyone else so that this will help disprove those like racist ideas that people may have about my communities, which is an unfair standard for people.
Definitely.
There have been like multiple schools where they've started to cut like math and science, and so being able to reach the students who won't have access to that and introduce just like a little bit of curiosity into their life, because you do need curiosity in order to like do anything. This is how we get our purpose, is you find something that you're interested in, and so if you don't know everything, you're just going to be kind of driven into like a single line. And so this is like, even it's not even just to push into science, but it's to push into like life as general, because life in your small town or in your small community is significantly different from anything that you'll see outside in a different city, in a different town, different country.
There's also communities who rightfully have active distrust of scientists and science because of the way previously racist scientists have acted in the past, having studies where they don't tell the participants what exactly is happening because they don't think that community is like worth it because they're racist or intelligent enough to understand, or like they just dehumanize some of the participants. And because of that dark history of scientists misusing their work to exploit these communities, there are communities where scientists should put in an active effort to rebuild those bridges and try and rebuild trust. A lot of that hasn't been done.
So what organizations at Vanderbilt does IBA connect with to promote DEI efforts?
The Biological Science Graduate Student Association has kind of extended the line of communication of what can we do to help support this club, as it's primarily graduate students in the department, and so it makes sense for the Graduate Student Association to also want to know what's going on, how they can help the club that helps the department. We have some sort of communication with the Black Student Association because they have like a fall welcome back like activity fair, and so they reached out to us about like sending a volunteer to help like run their booth.
We've been trying to connect with some of these associations, and COVID made that really difficult.
Yeah.
We also have some contact with, weirdly enough, ASM, which is the American Society of Microbiology. We've helped them bring some speakers in. Beth Bowman, who is part of like the whole IGP program, has been really helpful in like helping organize and just giving us like an administrator's perspective. We wanted to like have some sort of happy hour or something with all of these different organizations. However, COVID happened, and then we were all kind of scrambling to figure out. But hopefully in the future we will have more connections with like other orgs.
So who do you consider some leaders of DEI efforts at Vanderbilt? IBA?
Yeah, hopefully. We try to be. Also, I mean, you have Dr. Nicole Joseph, who I talked about earlier, who's at Vanderbilt, has been a big leader in those efforts.
Kathy Friedman, Katrina and my PI She has really worked this past few years to start at Vanderbilt the MARC program, which is an NIH program that's maximizing access to research careers. And then additionally, she was like, this is a great program for juniors and seniors to be paid to do research. Like, the participants are typically more underrepresented groups in STEM. Based on like what they know about tracking undergraduate students, she realized that the drop-off was before they got to junior and senior level. And so her whole thing was, what is the point of having a program targeted after the drop-off has already occurred? And so she worked with another faculty, Doug McMahon, to start the pre-MARC program. So this is for like rising sophomores, to basically show them that like they are good enough to be in STEM, and like there is a place for them in STEM, and promote this sense of belonging, as well as giving them opportunities to research with faculty, to help link them with faculty whose research interests align with them, which is really important if you're in this sea of like, I don't know where to even start my research career. We've now started with like the graduate students. You have the opportunity to be a part of like a more mentoring program with a graduate student, as well as one of these pre-MARC scholars. Throughout the summer, different graduate students would come and talk about like their journey to grad school, or give them feedback on their poster presentation in a very like low stakes environment, which I think is a really good opportunity for undergraduates.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Also, people at like the Center for Teaching that have really advocated for like implicit bias training and things like that. Dr. Cynthia Brame does a lot to like help advocate for different trainings so people can be better mentors.
Yeah. So what are some ways that underrepresented graduate students can make sure a lab they are going to join is going to be a space that accepts and uplifts their identity?
Really hard to just go off of first impressions and know if like you can get duped really easily if you just like go off of a first impression. So like if it's not a new professor, I would look at, do they have students who have been underrepresented, or would you be the first one? And if you are going to be the first one, I would ask some questions about how willing that professor would be to like learn about how to properly mentor someone who is an underrepresented student. And if they have been underrepresented students in their lab, can you talk to them? Can you reach out to those students and just ask them what their experience has been like? So it's harder if it's a new professor who like hasn't had students, in which case you're just gonna have to talk to them. And I would say if you're rotating, just like, it's hard to do, but you could just sit down and just say like, hey, how willing would you be to like go to like implicit bias training, for example? Or like, would you be willing to like talk to me about issues if I had issues? That's hard to do because you don't want to seem like you're a high maintenance student, but it's really important because at the end of the day, that's the lab you're going to be in for a few years.
Yeah. Definitely.
If you can't talk to previous grad students or current grad students, that's less scary than talking to the professor. But if it's a new professor who doesn't have as many new students, or any new students, you might be the first student they've ever mentored.
And for the most part, new faculty will
work with you.
will be really honest because they're learning how to be a mentor as it goes.
Yeah.
And so if you can help them and they can help you along those types of journeys.
Sometimes new mentors will be even more likely to be willing
open up
to do extra stuff or to like learn how to be a mentor. Sometimes older mentors who have mentored a lot of people will be like, my method works.
I've done it. I've had 20 students.
Yeah.
It's not going to change.
Exactly.
Done. Why fix what's not broken?
Exactly.
And you're like, it's pretty broken.
Yeah. So what does an equitable and diverse academic environment look like to you?
An environment that I would see in academia that would be equitable for everyone would first be like the opportunities would be all the same for everyone. And not even just like every student gets equal. That isn't equitable, okay? Because some people come in already disadvantaged. And so let's say I get pregnant in grad school and I have a kid and I have to take care of them. So I already have way more responsibilities than another person. And I already have more like financial differences because I'm gonna have to pay more to go into my child's care, and childcare is really expensive. And so if there is a way to like fund those type of things, differences, and have everyone starting at an equal level. Another thing that's really difficult, especially in like a city like, so we're in Nashville, and the community is changing, and the availability for housing is changing, and the type of housing that each graduate student would want to have is also changing. And if you don't have like the ability to pay for the type of housing you want, and I'm like, okay, I'm disadvantaged, so I already have to live with like 4 roommates to start with, versus like someone else would live by themselves and wouldn't have to worry about the social dynamics of a housing situation, which housing situation is a huge factor. If you haven't had roommates and you don't get along with them, you realize how bad it actually is. Because it affects you emotionally, it'll affect your work, it affects everything. And so if there isn't a way for the university to be able to support students in a way, not even just in school, but things outside of school to help them kind of evenize the playing field.
I mean, it's just subsidizing different things. So like subsidizing childcare. We have to pay for parking, which is annoying. When people walk in, but not everyone can afford to live in walking distance from campus. Subsidizing housing, which you talked about. An equitable department would be able to subsidize some of these things. Like it would be difficult to like ensure that everybody is always like on an equal playing field, just because like people come from different socioeconomic statuses. So like I'm never going to be completely on an even playing field with someone whose parents are both like surgeons, which is like the way it is, and it is fine. But there are ways the school could make it easier, like not making me pay for parking.
Jordan, Lindsay, and I were talking one time, and they said like men in their lab do not pay for parking. They just park far off campus and just walk. And they're like, I don't feel comfortable walking alone at night to my car. So that's great for you that you can do that. Like, but I can't because I'm scared. I don't know.
Because
like,
people are getting kidnapped?
It's, walking alone at night, if you have to stay late, like...
I stay late all the time.
Yeah, and like walking by yourself is scary.
No, I get my car and I park it illegally, like right there.
Yeah, well, cut that out.
Yeah, I mean, that's just parking.
Yeah.
And there's like a whole other host of issues.
Yeah.
So they have essentially that like app that you can like have on your phone to like help secure.
Oh, Vandy Safe?
That one. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't work?
Vandy Safe does not work.
Because I have like multiplied, like when I first started working late, because I was on the later shift like last year for COVID reasons, I was like, okay, my mom was like, okay, make sure that someone knows where you're walking. They're like, in the Vandy Safe, I was like, oh yeah, so we'll have like a police officer monitor your location.
Yeah.
But like after like 12 o'clock, they're like, officers are not available.
And that's like when you...
And I'm like that's what the university said that they have.
Yeah.
And they don't have it.
They're offering it as like a, we provide this for people.
Yeah.
And I tried it 3 times, and I was like, oh, I give up. I'm going to just call my mom every time and she'll be on the phone
That's
with me.
messed up. How has being a part of IBA affected your graduate school experience?
Negatively.
Okay. I mean,
it's good.
It's great to get to know
Fantastic.
people. You get to know people outside of your lab, especially people who have similar interests. It has been great for thinking about like these different issues that you might not normally think about. And then you get to talk about them. Like you don't just have to think about them and suffer. You can be like, how are we gonna like work together to figure out, like obviously we're not gonna like solve inequity, right? But it is good just to have a space to be like, guys, you'll never believe like what this freaking white man said to me today. I really enjoyed having like a safe space to talk about these things and to get to know people, even if they keep forcing me to be president.
It also gives you like something to think about. Like there's definitely some issues that I haven't thought about because they don't affect me.
Yeah.
And so I think about it, I'm like, oh, now I see it everywhere. And I tell other people because I'm just like, did you know this happens? Did you know this happens? And like people are like, what? And they're like, really? And I'm like, Vanderbilt doesn't have this. And they're like, what? I thought they did. So it's like things that you bring up and then you bring up with colleagues. I like to share what we learn about, mostly with Adriana.
Mostly yes.
And so it's just like, it's something you think about, and then it's something that you can start to to do something about too. Because then you're like, okay, so we don't have this. What else do we need?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to like try to start it by yourself, but then there's other people there that are like, oh, okay, we really do need this.
I think it definitely gives each member more of like a sense of community within the department, because you have this group of people that comes together due to a common sense of values and things that they want and care about, and people that you can connect with that maybe you weren't able to connect with before, that share common values, which is a really great experience for people to have in graduate school.
In grad school, it can be really easy just to stay in your lab and only know the people in your lab.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah, so it's just me. It's like being in IBA lets you know people from other spaces and other labs, and lets you like talk about stuff that's not just your research for a second, which is nice.
Okay, so thank you guys so much for being here today and telling us all about IBA and all sorts of things. Do you guys have any last words for the viewers today?
Remi, it's your time to shine.
I know you guys have been wondering all video long, but I am in fact single. Hit me up. Don't forget to like and subscribe, besties.
Like and subscribe.
Here.
There.
So you can find Katrina and Remi and Mariana at their Twitters here below on the screen, and I'll also link them in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to comment, tell us what you thought, tell us if you have questions, and make sure to like and subscribe, like Remi said, and we will see you next time.
What can we do to haze people? Remi teaches you a TikTok dance.
If you can't perform the dance, you're out.
I would be out.
I don't understand why we have to pay for pork.
Yeah.
They have to pay for someone
To write the
write
She's like, I walk alone at night. She has 18 roommates. They're all cops, okay?
I have
all
one
our
roommate.
bodybuilders, they'll beat you
They're
up.
giant, they're mean.
I have one roommate. She's on vacation. Distance. I've seen you ride your bike. I'm like.